Hello everyone, it's Colin here. Welcome to another episode of Colin on Culture. Today I'm talking about subcultures and how they are the catalyst for great organizational culture. I was interviewed last week and this topic came up, this topic of microcultures, subcultures. For those of you who are familiar with my books, I first wrote about this in 2019 in my book, Culture Fix. Now, it's been based on my own experiences as a former manager myself. I won't bore you with the long story of how I became a manager. But essentially, I was given pretty much free rein to create the team. In my first managerial role, create the team we needed to get the job done, which most managers are, kind of given that autonomy often. I mean, not everybody. You probably listen. Somebody listen to this going, not me. But essentially, they say, here's the job that you've got to do. Here's the people, away you go. And so in my naivety at the time, but it turned out to be a really good thing, I was just like, great, well, I'll just set about creating something that I think will work. And it was very humanistic. It was very much focused on, here's the goal, but what do we as a team need to do in order to achieve the goal? Listen, I won't lie to you. Back then I didn't really know what I was doing. Essentially, I just wanted to create the conditions where we could all, me included, but we could all succeed. I had a job to do. Everyone had a job to do. How do we do this? Anyway, long story short, like I said, I created a bit of a blueprint, which I then took job to job. And it wasn't without its bumps in the road and it wasn't without its forks in the road, where it's like, oh, maybe that's not right. Maybe I'll go this way instead. And so essentially what I kind of became, without really planning it, was someone who was a bit of an expert on building teams, because try, fail. The classic way that you would learn to become anything is, here's some knowledge and then try, fail, ask, take on some more information, never stop learning, away we go. And I reflected on this as I was writing Culture Fix. There was a book at the time by a guy called Laszlo Bock, who used to work for Google. I think it was called Work Rules. And in it, he said it is within anybody's grasp to be the founder and culture creator for their own team. And I was like, absolutely right, spot on. This is what I'd been doing. And yet, even now, 6 years on since Culture Fix, and I read portions of it recently, and I'm like, actually, there's still some people who don't know this stuff. It's still kind of relevant. It's still true. But organizations still see culture change as too hard. Now, I talked to a senior executive. There's a major transformation going on in the business that they work in right now. And he said, oh, we've got this big transformation office, but we're finding it hard to navigate the culture change piece. And of course, transformation offices, just like any office, is very usually coordinating, administrating. But as soon as you give them the task of changing the culture, it tends to grind to a halt, because what they try and do is try and change the whole. And you can't. And this is why people put culture change in the too hard basket, because they try and change the whole. And this is not how you change culture. I worked with a startup late last year. I think I mentioned this on the podcast before. They were 150 people. And I talked about the evolution of business and also the evolution of culture. And at 50 people, if I'm a founder, if I'm a senior leader of a business, I still generally know everybody within the team, the 50 people. As soon as I get above that number, this is where subcultures start to have an impact, because what we naturally do is, because as the founder or the CEO, I can't have everyone reporting to me. It's just too much work. And so what we do is we start to segment the team into different areas, usually different technical capabilities. That makes the most sense. And so all of a sudden, what we've got now is subcultures of the overall culture. And so as soon as you get over 50, that's certainly in my experience, that's generally the number. As soon as you get 51 employees, you start to segment the team. You need to do some work on your subcultures. And so I thought it was important that I maybe discuss this in a little bit more detail, because I know certain people are struggling about this. Now, the first question, I was going to cover this at the end, but I think I'll cover this at the start, because I think people wait for permission. They're like, oh, Colin, but I haven't got the permission to create my own culture. You don't need it. If you're a manager, you have people reporting to you, even if it's just one person, you do not need permission. Generally, you need permission to spend money, to do something that's outside of the accepted cultural norms sometimes. So, for example, if you want to engage somebody but don't want to go through a process, you need permission for that. But to create your own team, you don't need any permission. You have the agency to do it right now. What you might not have is the skills. Because what we do within our organizations is we don't scale up our managers with the information that they need in order to create this sense of belonging, this sense of community. And the world has changed. Now, we don't work in a factory environment anymore where the boss tells you what to do and you do it. We work in an environment where employees are looking for safety, physical and emotional. They're looking for motivation. They're looking for inspiration. They're looking for a sense of belonging. They're looking for a sense of community. And as a manager, it's your job to create that. One survey recently found 3/4 of people are looking for a sense of community and a sense of belonging. Now, as a manager, if I said to you, great, how do you create a sense of belonging? Very difficult to answer that question if you don't have the skill sets. Very, very difficult. And yet 3/4 of employees are looking for it. And as new generations come into the workforce, there's a greater sense of we need to be together, we need to be at one. Now, it became very, very hard to do during COVID because everybody was in different places at different times. People are still struggling with it. I'm doing a management program in a couple of weeks where I'm teaching managers how to do it for a hybrid working company because they're like, we're really struggling with it. And the irony is I'm doing it remotely. Of course I am. Which you can do. Of course you can do. But what you have to do is find ways to connect people and give them this sense of shared purpose. And of course, giving them the skill sets about how to create culture is the way to do it. So as soon as you create this sense of belonging, the odds of improving the culture increase. I think one survey found it was like 785%, something absolutely crazy like that. Because all of a sudden, what you've got is connection to the center. Now, for those of you who like a metaphor, and people do love a metaphor, so the subcultures and why they're catalysts for change, right? It's like cooking. All the ingredients have to be right, and you have to put them in the right way in the pan in order for it to taste really good. If the onion is moldy, or if the sauce has gone off that you're using, then the whole thing's going to taste awful. And yet it's just one ingredient. And so this is often when organizations look at their overall engagement scores and they're like, oh, why is our engagement score 62%? 90% of the teams are great. But 10% of the teams, the managers either just don't have the skill or just don't have the behaviors in order to create this sense of vibrancy to contribute to the overall culture. So if you think about, well, culture as a tree within your organizations, metaphors, analogies, and mixing them all on today's podcast. So if you think about it as a tree, like the very top of the tree, kind of the sun that shines down on the tree, that's your vision and your purpose. That's what we're shooting for. A tree is aiming towards the sun. That's why it grows so high. Get as much sunlight as it possibly can, as much rain as it possibly can. All right, that's the vision and that's the purpose, right? And then the trunk of the tree are your values. These are emotional principles. These are the things that connect us as an organization. Each of the branches is a subculture, but they have to have a connection to the values and they have to point towards the sun. All right, hopefully that made sense. Hopefully it did. But organizations get themselves into a real mess because what they try and do is define the subcultures, and you can't. And this concept of one team, we need one team. One team is a collection of those subcultures. And it's crucially important that managers have the skill to build the subcultures because then they connect to the branches. Everybody lives the values. We point towards the sun. We achieve our vision and our purpose. It is that simple and that straightforward. The difficulty comes because actually teaching people how to do it, that's relatively straightforward too. relatively straightforward. You get everybody together, you do a day or two, whatever you've got time for. Here are the key skills that you need to be able to build your own team culture. And the managers who don't do it show themselves up very, very quickly. It's reflected in if you do an engagement survey, a pulse score, if you create a feedback loop. I always say at the end of the programs that I run, how are we going to measure it? It's important that we do. You're making an investment, so it's important that we measure it. And so the difficulty comes in performance managing the one or two or three managers who don't want to do it. And there are always one or two or three. But actually, when you get into a good cycle of performance management, and remember empathy first, you want to help managers first to be able to do the things in the right way. And then, in my experience, they generally correct, or they put their skills into action. All of a sudden, you start seeing some improvements. It takes 3 to 6 months, sometimes 9 months if it's an ingrained behavior. All of a sudden, managers start to become that catalyst for change, because what they're doing is building subcultures that have a sense of community, that have a sense of belonging, that have a sense of togetherness. And this beautiful thing starts happening is each of the leaves on the branch, it's going to come back here, the employees, they all want to contribute. They all want to do their bit. They're all catching a bit of sun. They're all catching a bit of rain. They're all contributing to the branch that's contributing to the trunk, and the tree has strength and it grows and it continues to grow. Now, don't get me wrong. You have to have clear boundaries. So one team I was working with recently, and this was a manager who wanted to make real difference in his organization. They recognized they got a team of 200 people. They recognized that as a team, things aren't as good as they can be. And so as a manager, you've got to be really, really clear. Every time we build a team, it has to be in line with the organization's values. It can't deviate from them. What we don't want to do is create a cult off to the side. I've talked about this before. What we want to do is create something that's so good that people look at it and go, how do I join that? How can I become part of that? What you guys are doing is really, really good. I'd love to be part of that. Because in those subcultures, collaboration increases, communication improves. You get more innovation, creativity, curiosity, all of those things. You get that in really efficient subcultures. Now, Spotify, the music company Spotify, or the technology streaming company, not really a music company, they really brought this to the fore about 7 years ago. Remember the agile boom? Remember before we were going gaga over AI, it was all about going agile. And they had these things called tribes, squads. I'm trying to remember it. Squads, tribes. What was the other one? Guilds. That's right. And they had these things. So squads were 6 to 12 people that they kind of stood up and down very, very quickly. Tribes were 100 people, what we would call a department. And guilds were communities of practice, essentially. And loads of people went and implemented all of this. I remember speaking to a bank. They followed the structure exactly, because we love a good method. We do. Oh, Spotify doing this, we should do it. And I said, how's it going? Everyone's so confused. It's not really working for us. I'm like, well, did you ask the question whether you had the kind of culture that needed to organize itself in that way? I think banking feels quite constrained. It's not that it can't work, but obviously culturally you need people who are flexible and open to change and all of these kinds of things. But essentially what they were trying to do was implement really efficient substructures. They could have done exactly the same by actually educating their managers on how to build really efficient subcultures, and then performance manage ones that don't, praise the ones that do, but don't praise kind of them as individuals, praise the behavior that they demonstrate to implement the learning, so that other people are like, well, I want to be like that. Have a program that you run every year for new managers so that they've all got the same skill set. It's pretty, like I said, it's pretty straightforward as a learning and development initiative. But A, we never think of it. And B, if we do think of it, it's the first thing that we pull when the going gets tough. But if as an organization you want a really, really good culture, your subcultures are the catalyst for its change, and they always have been. And so books like Tribes by Seth Godin have talked about this. A Team of Teams, General Stanley McChrystal. If you look at any successful sports team, They have really efficient subcultures who look like an NFL team. They have an offense team, a defense team, a kicking team. You look at how a business is structured, the ones that succeed really put the emphasis on each team contributing to the values and the vision or purpose in order to get the results. Those teams don't focus on the results. They become focused on really becoming a great team. That's what they're focused on in line with the organization's values. You get this beautiful connection, and that is how you get your culture change. All right, that's it for your Colin on Culture podcast today. Ta-ra for now.